At Thanksgiving, Edward Carter stood before 30 relatives and grounded 29-year-old Nami Carter like a child for asking about her inheritance. Laughter broke across both tables, and Nami Carter felt heat climb from her chest to her face, while every eye stayed fixed on her shame. Edward Carter pointed toward the stairs with perfect courtroom authority, expecting obedience, silence, and one more easy victory over his daughter. Nami Carter met Edward Carter's eyes, held the moment still, and answered with one calm word that made the room briefly falter. "All right." The next morning, Edward Carter knocked on her bedroom door, smug and certain that humiliation had finally taught Nami Carter her place. He pushed the door open and found no clothes, no suitcase, no trace of Nami Carter, only an empty room and rising panic. Before Edward Carter could call her, the doorbell rang, and attorney Samuel Whitmore stood outside holding a briefcase full of truth. Samuel Whitmore stepped onto the porch, looked at Edward Carter, and asked the question that cracked the entire family myth. "What have you done?" Before I tell you what was in that briefcase, like and subscribe only if this story truly reaches you, and tell me where you are listening from. Now let me take you back to September, to the Tuesday morning Evelyn Carter died, and the first domino finally tipped into motion. Evelyn Carter passed away at Providence Portland Medical Center on a rainy Tuesday morning, 87 years old and still sharper than most. At 6:14 a.m., Helen Carter called Nami Carter, who was already awake at her drafting table, sketching a rain garden for a client. Helen Carter's voice sounded thin as tissue when she said, "Grandma is gone," and the exact time stayed etched in Nami Carter's memory. Nami Carter drove 20 silent minutes through Portland rain, hearing only windshield taps and the shaky rhythm of her own breathing. At the hospital hallway, Edward Carter, 63, already stood composed in a waxed jacket, speaking on his phone about paperwork and probate. Nami Carter heard filing timeline and probate schedule before Edward Carter noticed her and ended the call without warmth or grief. Beside him stood Lucas Carter, 33, in a dark suit, one arm around Edward Carter like a campaign partner guarding power. Father and son looked like a single wall, a practiced unit, while Nami Carter, stood alone holding coffee she never drank. The last time Nami Carter had seen Evelyn Carter, they were in the hawthorn garden, hand in hand beside fading peonies. Evelyn Carter had squeezed her hand and whispered, "I have taken care of things. Trust me." Nami Carter, okay? At the funeral 3 days later, white lilies lined the old stone church, and the mahogany casket reflected cold light like polished judgment. Edward Carter delivered the eulogy for 11 full minutes, praising Brennan legacy, tradition, and the son who would carry the family forward. He spoke Lucas Carter's name 4 times, mentioned Helen Carter once, and did not mention Nami Carter at all. In the reception line, someone asked Nami Carter what she did for work, and Edward Carter answered before she could speak. He said she plants trees for rich people, and polite chuckles spread while Nami Carter felt humiliation rise like fire behind her ribs. As she turned to leave, an older silver-haired man with thin gold glasses stepped forward and took her hand with unusual gentleness. He told Nami Carter that Evelyn Carter had been very proud of her, then vanished into black coats before giving his name. That quiet stranger was Samuel Whitmore, and though she did not know it yet, he held the key to everything her father feared. That evening, 15 relatives gathered at the Hawthorne Colonial, the White House Evelyn Carter had built with money from her own family. Nami Carter loved the crown molding, deep windowsills, and garden where Evelyn Carter had grown peonies the color of ballet slippers. The long oak table gleamed with old silver, candles, and wine, every detail arranged to perform wealth, lineage, and impossible perfection. Edward Carter sat at the head of the table and raised his glass as if grief itself needed his permission to proceed. He announced that Evelyn Carter had left everything to him to manage, and he would distribute family assets based on capability. Then Edward Carter looked directly at Nami Carter and said she need not worry because complex things were not really her area. Lucas Carter nodded like a clerk endorsing a ruling, while Claire Carter adjusted pearls and let the insult settle into the room. Nami Carter set down her fork and started to say that Evelyn Carter had told her something important before she died. Edward Carter cut in at once, claiming Evelyn Carter had been confused at the end and that any promise should be forgotten. Across the table, Helen Carter stared only at her plate, saying nothing, offering nothing, as silence did its familiar work. After dinner, Nami Carter escaped upstairs to the bedroom where she had grown from child to invisible daughter. The Frank Lloyd Wright poster still hung there with curling edges, as if time itself had been trapped under this roof. She opened the nightstand drawer from habit and found an envelope that had not been there before. Cream stationery, blue ink, her name. The handwriting was unmistakable, shaky but deliberate, and Nami Carter knew immediately that Evelyn Carter had left it for her. Sitting cross-legged on the twin bed, under the same wobbling ceiling fan, she opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were two things: a handwritten letter from Evelyn Carter and a partial photocopy of a longer legal document. The photocopied header read "Irrevocable Trust Agreement," and halfway down the page, one highlighted line named Nami Carter Beneficiary. Tears slid down her face as she read Evelyn Carter's words, pressed hard enough into the paper to leave grooves behind. Evelyn Carter wrote that Edward Carter was already doing what she knew he would do, and that men like him only hear documents. She instructed Nami Carter, to trust attorney Samuel Whitmore, whose office was on Northwest 23rd Avenue in Portland. The copy was only partial, Evelyn Carter warned. Not enough to prove anything alone, but enough to tell the truth. She told Nami Carter to show no one, not Edward Carter, not Lucas Carter, not even Helen Carter. Evelyn Carter wrote that she loved Helen Carter, but that Helen Carter would tell Edward Carter, whether she meant to or not. Then came the line that shattered Nami Carter open. "You are always my architect, the one who builds." Nami Carter folded the letter back into the envelope and held it against her chest as if it still carried warmth. The photocopy was incomplete, her lawyer non-existent, and Evelyn Carter had been buried only 48 hours earlier. Yet for the first time in years, Nami Carter felt something bigger than smallness. She felt believed in. She drove back to her Portland studio the next morning without saying goodbye, and nobody called to ask where she had gone. Her tiny apartment waited exactly as she had left it. Crowded plants, tracing paper, and a cold mug of tea by the sink. It was small enough to touch opposite walls with outstretched arms, but it was hers, the one place no one measured her worth. At her laptop, Nami Carter searched Samuel Whitmore, attorney Portland, and found the funeral stranger staring back in the headshot. His office was indeed on Northwest 23rd Avenue, small, solo, and focused on trusts and estate planning. Her cursor hovered over the phone number, but fear stopped her before hope could take its first true step. One voice inside her whispered that maybe Evelyn Carter had only been confused, and that this entire promise would dissolve under daylight. Another voice, older and harder, sounded exactly like years of Edward Carter, telling Nami Carter not to embarrass herself. She was not ready to risk losing the one person who had believed in her, so she closed the search and returned to work. A landscape architecture firm in the Pearl District had a rooftop garden deadline, and the paycheck mattered more than panic that week. Nami Carter was still carrying over $38,000 in student debt from the law school year she left behind. She had dropped out to pursue design, the year Edward Carter declared she had betrayed the family and its proper destiny. While checking project specs, she noticed one email buried between routine notices and nearly clicked past it without thinking. It was from Lucas Carter, accidentally forwarded, with a subject line that froze her hand above the trackpad: Trust Amendment Draft Petition. She opened just enough to feel dread bloom, then work pulled her away before she could read the chain in full. 3 weeks passed under 16-hour workdays, and Nami Carter let exhaustion numb what fear could not settle, but the email remained in her inbox like a splinter. Impossible to ignore, impossible to touch without hurting. Then Helen Carter called and said Edward Carter wanted the whole family together for Thanksgiving to mend things. Nami Carter nearly laughed because Edward Carter never mended anything. He broke things and blamed them for breaking. Helen Carter pleaded with the careful thinness she always used when disguising orders as invitations and asked her to come. After hanging up, Nami Carter sat at her second-hand table and finally opened a full email chain from Lucas Carter. 7 messages stretched across 2 weeks between Edward Carter and Lucas Carter, coldly planning a legal theft in plain language. Lucas Carter had drafted a petition asking the court to change Evelyn Carter's trust beneficiary from Naomi Nami Carter to himself. The filing argued she was financially unstable, professionally inconsistent, asset poor, and burdened by educational debt. Legal jargon hurt, but one casual line from Lucas Carter cut deepest. She will not fight it. She never fights anything. Then came the smug finish. That is the beauty of it, Dad. Written as if Naomi Nami Carter were already erased. She sat motionless for a long time, then screenshot every email, backed them up online, and saved copies to a hidden drive. After that, Naomi Nami Carter called Helen Carter back and said she would be there for Thanksgiving after all. She was going home, but not to heal anything. She was going to face the people who had counted on her silence. The next morning, Naomi Nami Carter finally called the office of Samuel Whitmore. Heart pounding against old training, an older receptionist answered warmly, heard the name Brennan, and said Samuel Whitmore had been expecting her call. 2 hours later, Naomi Nami Carter sat across from him in a book-lined office full of worn legal volumes and cold coffee. Samuel Whitmore confirmed he had served Evelyn Carter for 20 years and had drafted her will, living trust, and later protections. 8 years earlier, after a troubling conversation, Evelyn Carter had asked him to create an irrevocable trust, naming only one beneficiary. Samuel Whitmore slid the original document across the desk. Thick cream paper, red Oregon notary seal, signatures steady and undeniable. The trust held $620,000 in an educational fund managed by U.S. Bank, and could not be casually altered. Irrevocable meant Edward Carter, though trustee, could not change the beneficiary without written consent or a valid court ruling. Evelyn Carter had anticipated challenge and arranged a cognitive evaluation from Dr. Amelia Brooks the same week she signed. The report proved she was fully competent, decisive, and legally clear, closing the very excuse Edward Carter would try to use. Then Samuel Whitmore revealed that Edward Carter had already filed a petition 3 weeks earlier to change the beneficiary to Lucas Carter. In that filing, Edward Carter falsely told the court he had been unable to locate Naomi Nami Carter for consent. Samuel Whitmore's jaw tightened when Naomi Nami Carter showed him the email chain proving deliberate breach of fiduciary duty. He read every page, then said she had everything needed to fight and win if she chose to stand. Naomi Nami Carter answered without hesitation this time, "I want to fight this." Then Samuel Whitmore added one more truth that stopped the room inside her from breathing for a beat. Evelyn Carter had also left Naomi Nami Carter the Cedar cottage at Cannon Beach, hidden inside the full trust terms. It was the place of summer sunsets and chamomile tea, the place Evelyn Carter had once called her favorite in the world. Samuel Whitmore believed Edward Carter did not even know about the cottage because he had never read the document carefully. Evelyn Carter had spent 8 years preparing shields around Naomi Nami Carter, knowing exactly what would happen after her death. When asked when she wanted to use the evidence, Naomi Nami Carter said one word that set the date: Thanksgiving. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Naomi Nami Carter packed light, one change of clothes, her camel coat, a toothbrush, and copies. The originals stayed locked in Samuel Whitmore's office safe, but notarized copies traveled with her as proof for the family. She drove south through amber Oregon hills, beneath a sky too gray to choose between rain and resignation. The Hawthorne house appeared through the trees like it always had, white, stately, and perfectly built to resemble a good family. Helen Carter met Naomi Nami Carter at the doors and hugged her one beat too long, worry hidden under softness. She whispered that Edward Carter was in a mood, which in that house meant everyone else should shrink accordingly. In her old room, Naomi Nami Carter slid the thick folder beneath the mattress before going downstairs to the performance. Through the window, she saw Evelyn Carter's peony garden, overgrown and gray, abandoned the way love often was in this house. Standing there, palm against cold glass, Naomi Nami Carter whispered that she was here and hoped somehow Evelyn Carter knew. Downstairs, wine was open. Fire crackled, and Edward Carter did not even stand when his daughter entered the room. He only looked up from his leather chair and said, "Oh, you came," as if attendance itself were an offense. Lucas Carter swirled his drink, glanced at her old car, and mocked the fact that Naomi Nami Carter still had not upgraded. She smiled, sat, and said nothing, because silence was now strategy, not surrender. And that difference mattered. Thanksgiving morning filled the house like a theater before opening night. Cars along the street, voices in every room, 32 relatives inside. Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Raymond, cousins from Eugene, Great-Aunt Vivian, and children all arrived under the illusion of family tradition. By noon, noise had become a living thing. Laughter, clinking glasses, running feet, oven timers, and the pressure of being watched. In the kitchen, Nami Carter chopped celery for stuffing, while Helen Carter and Claire Carter drank tea and observed. It felt exactly like childhood. The same division of labor, the same assumption that service was her most suitable contribution. At 4, the long oak table seated 18, while the rest of the family overflowed into the adjacent room on folding chairs. Nami Carter was placed at the folding table beside 9-year-old Noah, and one empty chair far from the center. Under the chandelier, Edward Carter raised a glass and announced this Thanksgiving was special despite the family's loss. He praised endurance, praised lineage, and then praised Lucas Carter for winning the biggest case of his career. Applause followed instantly, and Lucas Carter accepted it with polished modesty, one hand resting neatly on Claire Carter's shoulder. From the side table, Aunt Beatrice called out to ask whether Nami Carter had any good news to share. Before Nami Carter could answer, Edward Carter said she was still finding her way, and at least she was creative. Then he added that every family needs someone to remind the rest not to take a wrong turn, and looked straight at her. Laughter rolled across both tables, while Nami Carter kept her spine straight and face neutral by long habit. Beside her, Noah looked up with childlike honesty and quietly asked if she was okay while the adults kept eating. Nami Carter handed him a bread roll, nodded gently, and wondered how the smallest person there saw the most. After dinner, pie, and port wine, Edward Carter rose again with the posture of a man delivering official history. He announced that the next morning he would make an important family statement about Evelyn Carter's estate. Edward Carter said everyone should be present because it was what Evelyn Carter would have wanted, though truth rarely needed his voice. Nami Carter looked from Lucas Carter's private smile to Helen Carter's lowered eyes and understood tomorrow's trap. She excused herself to wash dishes while relatives drifted back to laughter, warm drink, and convenient blindness. In the kitchen, water ran over her hands while 32 people enjoyed the holiday and offered no help at all. Then Lucas Carter leaned in the doorway with a wine glass and said she should thank Edward Carter for even letting her sit there. He laughed at his own joke about the children's table, expecting the old silence to absorb one more insult without resistance. Nami Carter kept scrubbing the roasting pan until something in her, stretched tight for 29 years, began to hum. Without turning, she asked Lucas Carter one steady question. "Do you know what Evelyn Carter left me?" The silence behind her changed immediately, sharp and charged, and when she glanced back, Lucas Carter's face had gone still. He left the kitchen without a word, and 10 minutes later, Edward Carter's voice thundered through the living room for her. 32 faces turned as Nami Carter walked in drying her hands, and Edward Carter pointed at her like a defendant. He demanded to know what she had said to Lucas Carter, accusing her of threatening and manipulating the family through the will. Before she could answer, Edward Carter cut her off and pronounced the sentence that sent the room into delighted absurdity. He told 29-year-old Nami Carter she was grounded until she apologized to Lucas Carter and obeyed him. The room erupted in laughter, not protest, and grown adults shook with amusement, while her humiliation became entertainment again. Aunt Beatrice covered her mouth, Uncle Raymond snorted into his glass, and even Claire Carter let out a careful little giggle. Helen Carter sat in the corner staring at her hands, and not one person said that enough was enough. Edward Carter's watch caught the chandelier light as he ordered Nami Carter upstairs like a disobedient child. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, then repeated that calm answer, "All right," and turned toward the stairs. In the darkness of her old room, Nami Carter closed the door, picked up her phone, and called Samuel Whitmore. The call rang twice before Samuel Whitmore answered, steady and awake, as though he had been waiting for the signal. Nami Carter asked him to bring the originals at 8 the next morning, and he promised simply, I will be there. She set her alarm for 4, sat on the edge of the twin bed, and listened to family laughter rise through the floor. In that dark room, Nami Carter thought one hard thought. Enjoy this, because it is the last time. If you have ever been humiliated by family in public, you already know how rage can stay silent and still become a plan. Stay with me. Because the next morning, Edward Carter opened that bedroom door, expecting obedience, and found only disappearance. Nami Carter left at 4:15 a.m. in socks, carrying her bag, her folder, and one final private goodbye. She moved carefully downstairs so the floorboards would not creak, and left only Evelyn Carter's framed photo on the nightstand. At a diner 3 miles away, Nami Carter ordered coffee she never drank and waited for daylight to sharpen. At 7:42 a.m., her phone lit up with a text from Lucas Carter asking where she was because Edward Carter wanted her. She did not answer. Back at the house, events were unfolding exactly as she knew they would. Around 7:30, Edward Carter came downstairs dressed for command and ordered someone to wake Nami Carter for her apology. No one volunteered, not out of courage, but because nobody wanted to be involved in another private cruelty. So Edward Carter climbed the stairs himself and knocked twice with the crisp entitlement of a man expecting immediate compliance. He called for Nami Carter to get up and apologize, then opened the door into a room stripped clean of her. The bed was made, the closet empty, the drawers cleared, and the photograph of Evelyn Carter lay face down like a period. Cousin Ethan later said Edward Carter stood there 10 long seconds, while confusion shifted into something darker and less controlled. Downstairs, Edward Carter announced that Nami Carter had fled in the night like a coward, pretending contempt covered fear. Lucas Carter looked up from his laptop, smiled tightly, and said that settled everything before the planned estate announcement. Edward Carter agreed and began to say the only possible objector had run away when the doorbell interrupted his performance. Helen Carter opened the front door and found Samuel Whitmore there in a gray suit, briefcase in hand, expression storm dark. He introduced himself as attorney for Evelyn Carter and stated he needed to address the entire family immediately. Silence spread across the breakfast room in slow rings until even children stopped moving and coffee cups hovered in midair. Samuel Whitmore entered with the pace of a man who belongs wherever law and truth must be spoken aloud. He placed his briefcase on the dining table over wrinkled Thanksgiving linen and unclasped it without asking permission. Edward Carter rose to his full height, broader and taller, and tried to reclaim the room through sheer physical command. He told Samuel Whitmore this was his home and that he had not been invited into it. Samuel Whitmore replied that the house had been built with Evelyn Carter's family money and that he was here for her beneficiary. Edward Carter began to say Nami Carter had no rights, but Samuel Whitmore cut through him like a clean blade. He declared that Nami Carter was sole beneficiary of an irrevocable trust executed 8 years earlier and known to Edward Carter. The room went still in the deep way rooms do when people understand they are hearing something irreversible. Edward Carter said Evelyn Carter had been in decline, but Samuel Whitmore answered with witnesses and medical evaluation already in hand. He offered to read the documentation aloud for everyone there, and the offer landed like a match near dry timber. Aunt Beatrice leaned forward. Uncle Raymond lowered his cup, and suspicion began replacing old reflexive loyalty. Edward Carter looked at the folder as if it were a loaded weapon and quietly ordered Samuel Whitmore out of his house. Then Samuel Whitmore asked him the question again, slower this time, and everyone heard the judgment inside it. What have you done? Edward Carter stepped closer and threatened police, but Samuel Whitmore did not move even an inch from his place. He said officers would see the petition Edward Carter had filed, falsely claiming he could not locate Nami Carter. He reminded the room that Nami Carter's number, address, and even last night's sleeping place had been known all along. Color moved across Edward Carter's face in ugly stages while relatives began exchanging looks too honest to ignore. Then Lucas Carter rose smoothly and tried to rescue the moment by speaking in careful, lawyerly tones about contesting documents. Samuel Whitmore turned toward Lucas Carter and asked whether he had drafted the fraudulent petition for his own father. He said he had the emails, and Lucas Carter's composure did not crack so much as vanish completely. Under his breath, Lucas Carter told Edward Carter they needed to speak privately, but panic had already outrun strategy. Edward Carter refused privacy, insisting he had nothing to hide, though the room now knew exactly what that meant. It was Aunt Beatrice who finally stood and said, with the authority of long-delayed honesty, "Let the man speak." Murmured agreement followed. Small at first, but real, like the first fractures spreading across a frozen lake. For the first time that weekend, Edward Carter saw his audience shifting away from him and toward the possibility of truth. He called the scene absurd and tried to recast Samuel Whitmore as an outsider, filling Nami Carter's head with fantasies. Samuel Whitmore answered that he had served Evelyn Carter for 20 years and was present because a trustee had broken the law. When Edward Carter shouted for him to get out, his voice cracked on the command and exposed more fear than force. Samuel Whitmore closed his briefcase, not in defeat but in calculation, and said he would return at 2 o'clock. He reminded Edward Carter that a formal reading of Evelyn Carter's estate was already on the calendar, then added one warning. When he came back, Samuel Whitmore said he would not be coming alone, and the front door clicked shut behind him. Turning back to 30 uneasy faces, Edward Carter rebuilt composure the way one straightens a picture after an earthquake. He apologized for the disturbance and claimed Nami Carter had hired some cheap lawyer to create chaos from a distance. Edward Carter promised that at 2 o'clock he would read Evelyn Carter's wishes properly and make everything clear. On the sofa, Lucas Carter reopened his laptop and began typing fast, deleting things he would soon wish still existed. Around the house, people returned to coffee and polite conversation, but ease had curdled into a waiting tension. 5 hours remained until 2 o'clock, and every second on Evelyn Carter's crystal mantel clock suddenly mattered. Outside, Nami Carter sat in her dented 2014 Honda near a coffee shop, invisible in exactly the way she needed. Her laptop was open on the passenger seat, as rain traced crooked lines down the windshield like restless nerves. At 8:17 a.m., Nami Carter had emailed U.S. Bank asking for written confirmation of her status in the trust. At 9:41, Trust Officer Patricia Moore replied that Nami Carter was the sole named beneficiary and the funds remained intact. The message confirmed the $620,000 had not been dispersed and that the petition filed by Edward Carter was unapproved. Patricia Moore also wrote that no distribution could occur without Nami Carter's written authorization, ending doubt with bank language. Nami Carter read the email 3 times, saved it, backed it up, and printed a physical copy at FedEx. At 11:15, Samuel Whitmore called and reported dryly that Edward Carter had indeed threatened police and thrown him out. Cousin Ethan had already texted Nami Carter the details from inside the house. Confirming nerves were spreading, Samuel Whitmore said he would park on the next block at 2 and asked again whether she was certain about this choice. Looking through rain at a woman and child laughing in puddles, Nami Carter said she was done going back. Back inside the Hawthorne house, the post-holiday mood had spoiled into careful talk and glances no one wanted noticed. In the hallway, Aunt Beatrice quietly asked Helen Carter whether Edward Carter truly had everything under control. Helen Carter admitted she did not know because Edward Carter never told her about finances, not then and not ever. In the kitchen, Ethan texted Nami Carter, asking if she was all right and promising to stay in the room. Meanwhile, in the mahogany study, Edward Carter kept calling lawyers, only to reach voicemail at every Portland office closed for the holiday. Lucas Carter suggested postponing the reading, but Edward Carter said he did not retreat from Samuel Whitmore, Nami Carter, or anyone. Lucas Carter looked, as Ethan later described it, like a man realizing too late that the lifeboat had a hole. At 12:30, Nami Carter met Samuel Whitmore again in his office for one final review before the confrontation. 4 neat stacks lay across the desk: the original trust, the doctor's competency letter, the email chain, and a final sealed surprise. Stack 1 held the cream paper trust signed by Evelyn Carter, with steady blue ink and an unforgiving red notary seal. Stack 2 held the evaluation from Dr. Amelia Brooks, proving Evelyn Carter had been mentally sound when she signed. Stack 3 held the emails from Edward Carter and Lucas Carter, with metadata intact and one line highlighted bright yellow. "She will not fight it," Lucas Carter had written, reducing his sister's life to an assumed weakness on a legal plan. Then Samuel Whitmore slid forward stack 4, the deed to the Hawthorne house, and the room inside Naomi Nami Carter went silent. The colonial on Hawthorne had remained in Evelyn Carter's name since 1981, bought with inheritance money before marriage. Under the trust terms, ownership transferred to Naomi Nami Carter at Evelyn Carter's death, not to Edward Carter at all. Edward Carter had never truly owned the house where he ruled, because he had never bothered reading past what served him. Naomi Nami Carter realized the throne room, the dining table, the rituals of authority, had all stood on borrowed ground. She gathered the copies into her manila folder, while Samuel Whitmore locked the originals back inside his briefcase. They agreed Naomi Nami Carter would enter first, and Samuel Whitmore would follow when she gave the signal. At 1:45, she drove back down Hawthorne Street beneath a thin November sun, reflecting off wet pavement like broken glass. She remembered bicycles, transplanted seedlings, and Evelyn Carter teaching her to move the whole root ball without leaving pieces behind. On the way, Helen Carter called and pleaded once more for an apology that could make everything over and manageable. Naomi Nami Carter answered that she was coming home, but not to apologize, and ended the call on the right thing. She parked behind the house near Samuel Whitmore's silver sedan, saw his nod through the windshield, and stepped out steady-handed. The gate stood open, the front door unlocked, and voices drifted from inside where 30 people waited for Edward Carter to define reality. Naomi Nami Carter entered through the kitchen and paused in the hallway just beyond sight of the rearranged living room. Chairs from every room faced the fireplace like pews, and Edward Carter stood at the front in pressed Oxford formality. In his hand, he held a single sheet of paper, raised just enough to resemble authority and too low for anyone to verify. He thanked everyone for coming and said he had carefully reviewed Evelyn Carter's wishes with help from Lucas Carter. Then Edward Carter announced that the family trust would be consolidated under his management for the good of the next generation. He declared the $620,000 fund would be transferred to Lucas Carter for stewardship. As for Naomi Nami Carter, Edward Carter said Evelyn Carter wanted her to receive a gesture of goodwill, $5,000. Sympathetic murmurs and approving nods moved through the room while Claire Carter touched Lucas Carter's arm with careful pride. Edward Carter asked whether there were any questions, and in the hallway, Naomi Nami Carter drew one steady breath. She stepped into the room carrying the manila folder, and at that same moment, Samuel Whitmore entered quietly behind her. 32 heads turned, and surprise traveled across the room faster than whisper, leaving Edward Carter visibly caught off script. He sneered that the prodigal daughter had returned and asked whether Naomi Nami Carter had come to apologize to her brother. Naomi Nami Carter said no, because she had come to hear the real will, and her own calm stunned even her. She walked past Edward Carter, past his watch and his practiced stance, and placed the folder beside the fireplace. When Edward Carter ordered Samuel Whitmore out again, Naomi Nami Carter turned not to him, but to the room. She apologized for interrupting, then said the paper Edward Carter had read was not Evelyn Carter's will or trust at all. It was only a distribution plan written by Edward Carter, and the real irrevocable trust was in the folder before them. Naomi Nami Carter told the room that Evelyn Carter had named one beneficiary only, and that beneficiary was her. Silence fell so deeply it no longer felt social. It felt atmospheric. The pressure drop before truth changes a family forever. At Aunt Beatrice's clear instruction to let her speak, Samuel Whitmore opened his briefcase and lifted the original trust. The red Oregon notary seal shone against cream paper like a stop sign, impossible to dismiss and dangerous to touch. Samuel Whitmore read aloud that Evelyn Carter established the trust solely for the benefit of Naomi Nami Carter. He read the amount held at U.S. Bank, $620,000, then paused just long enough for the room to register loss. Then came the second blow. The property at Hawthorne Street would also transfer to Naomi Nami Carter upon Evelyn Carter's death. An audible gasp moved through the chairs as relatives understood that the house itself had never belonged to Edward Carter. Samuel Whitmore explained that Edward Carter had only administrative authority as trustee, with no power to alter or encumber anything. He stated that Edward Carter had filed to replace Naomi Nami Carter with Lucas Carter, falsely claiming the beneficiary could not be found. Then Samuel Whitmore held up the printed email chain and read the line about Naomi Nami Carter never fighting anything. Every face turned toward Lucas Carter, whose hand froze on Claire Carter's arm as color drained out of him. Claire Carter slowly removed her arm and folded both hands in her lap, already retreating from the sinking alliance. From the back, Cousin Ethan stood and moved beside Naomi Nami Carter, saying nothing and proving everything. Edward Carter tried again to call Evelyn Carter confused, but Samuel Whitmore answered with Dr. Amelia Brooks's. He placed the medical evaluation on the table and said Evelyn Carter had scored in the 93rd percentile for her age. Then Great Aunt Vivian, nearly silent all weekend, spoke from the back and confirmed Evelyn Carter had told her years earlier. Great Aunt Vivian said Evelyn Carter had predicted Edward Carter would try to take it and had made sure he could not. The room no longer looked at Edward Carter with respect. It looked at him like rot finally exposed beneath polished wood. In front of 30 witnesses, Edward Carter turned on Lucas Carter and barked at him to do something, contest it, save this. Lucas Carter spoke so softly, only the front rows heard, but the words were devastating. Irrevocable means irrevocable. He admitted he had warned Edward Carter from the start, and in doing so confirmed the scheme more fully than any document could. Edward Carter slammed his hand down on a dining chair, and a port glass slipped from his other hand to the floor. Dark red wine spread across hardwood toward the rug, and no one moved to clean it, as if the room had chosen its symbol. Suddenly, Edward Carter changed tactics, softening his voice, lowering his shoulders, and turning counterfeit tenderness on his daughter. He called Naomi Nami Carter sweetheart, and claimed he had only wanted to protect family assets because she lacked experience. Naomi Nami Carter let the silence hold, then answered that this had never been love but control dressed as protection. She told Edward Carter he had never believed a daughter deserved what a son received, and the room heard the real case at last. Then Helen Carter stood, hands trembling, face wet with tears, and did what she had not done in decades. Helen Carter told Edward Carter he owed Naomi Nami Carter an apology and had owed her one for her entire life. The room held its breath while Edward Carter stared at his wife as though she had spoken in a language he did not know. He said nothing, turned away, and shut himself inside the study where he had ruled for years over things never truly his. In the strange quiet after that, invisible family lines shifted forever, not with shouting, but with where people chose to stand. Aunt Beatrice reached Naomi Nami Carter first, hugged her tightly, and said Evelyn Carter would be proud beyond words. Ethan squeezed her shoulder and said he had always known she was the toughest person in the family, only no one noticed. Cousins offered quiet apologies, some sincere and some ashamed, while others simply left because they did not know what to do with truth. Lucas Carter rose without meeting his sister's eyes and walked toward the door with Claire Carter, stripped of practiced elegance. In the hallway, Claire Carter unclasped her pearls and tucked them away, suddenly eager to appear smaller than the life she had performed. Beside the table, Samuel Whitmore repacked the documents and told Naomi Nami Carter he would file trustee removal on Monday morning. He said the trust would remain frozen until court action, with no distributions, no changes, and no path left for Edward Carter. The crystal clock on the mantel read 2:47 p.m. 30 years of silencing had been answered in just 47 minutes. Monday morning, Samuel Whitmore filed 3 separate actions with the county court and the state bar. The first petition sought removal of Edward Carter as trustee for breach of fiduciary duty and deliberate misrepresentation. The second asked the court to appoint Samuel Whitmore interim trustee until Naomi Nami Carter could choose a permanent replacement. The third was a bar complaint against Lucas Carter for drafting a fraudulent petition that benefited immediate family while hiding the conflict. Within 2 weeks, the court granted interim removal, and Edward Carter did not contest because there was no legal footing left. Attorney Daniel Foster, finally reached after the holiday, reportedly told Edward Carter that irrevocable still meant irrevocable. Daniel Foster also warned that the email evidence was damning and that fighting would only waste money on a certain loss. The full $620,000 were transferred into an account controlled by Naomi Nami Carter at U.S. Bank. Patricia Moore called personally to confirm the trust transfer, and for the first time, the money sounded less like fantasy than fact. The deed to Hawthorne Street was updated, replacing Evelyn Carter's name with Naomi Nami Carter's in the official records. The white colonial, the iron gate, the oak table, and the peony garden now belonged to the person Evelyn Carter had chosen. Meanwhile, the bar complaint against Lucas Carter advanced, and his largest client dropped him as the story began to circulate. He moved quietly into corporate consulting, work that required no courtroom, no license in good standing, and no public explanation. 3 days after the filing, Edward Carter called Naomi Nami Carter, and part of her still hoped for the right words. Instead, Edward Carter said she had destroyed the family, and Naomi Nami Carter answered that she had only brought receipts, 7. And that was the last time Naomi Nami Carter heard his voice directly after everything collapsed. 2 weeks later, Samuel Whitmore handed her a plain brass key and said the Hawthorne house was hers now. Those simple words undid Naomi Nami Carter more than the courtroom language ever had. Because ownership can sound like safety, she parked beneath bare December trees, opened the familiar gate, and stood before the porch with a heartbeat full of ghosts. When the front door opened, the first thing she noticed was the smell. Wood polish, old books, and Evelyn Carter's lavender sachets. Without Edward Carter's voice dominating every room, the house breathed differently, as if it had finally been allowed to rest. Naomi Nami Carter walked slowly through the living room, dining room, kitchen, and every upstairs room that still held old versions of her. In her former bedroom, the poster remained. In Evelyn Carter's room, the reading chair and unworn glasses waited in gentle stillness. Out back, the peony beds were brown and tangled, the stone path hidden beneath leaves, and the birdbath stood dry. Kneeling in the cold dirt, Naomi Nami Carter pressed both hands to the earth and promised Evelyn Carter she would restore it all. 1 week later, on a cold Saturday, she drove 90 minutes west to the cottage at Cannon Beach for the first time in years. The weathered cedar house looked smaller than memory, but still held salt air, wraparound porch boards, and the shape of belonging. Another brass key from Samuel Whitmore turned smoothly, and the door opened on cedar walls, and a scent that was unmistakably Evelyn Carter. On the kitchen table sat a wooden box placed in plain sight, almost as if Evelyn Carter had arranged the moment from beyond. Inside were photographs of Naomi Nami Carter and Evelyn Carter across years: rain boots, dunes, driftwood forts, and shared summer light. Beneath them lay a short letter saying Naomi Nami Carter had been brave enough and that the house had always been hers. Evelyn Carter wrote that she had only been keeping the cottage warm until the right person was ready to come home to it. Sitting on the porch facing Haystack Rock, Naomi Nami Carter cried differently there, not from shame but from release. The ocean did not care about Edward Carter's voice, legal tricks, or ruined performances, and that indifference felt holy. For 15 million years, the rock had stood through smaller storms than families. And Naomi Nami Carter felt peace return. That Sunday night back in Portland, she sat at the oak table in the Hawthorne house and wrote one clear email to the family. Naomi Nami Carter said she did not want to cut anyone out, but she would never return to a hierarchy disguised as love. She wrote that any future relationship would require mutual respect, not belittling, dismissal, or inherited control. Then she ended with the line that redrew every boundary. The door is open, but it swings both ways now. 20 minutes later, Helen Carter called, crying real tears, and admitted she should have stood up for her daughter years earlier. Helen Carter said she had been afraid of Edward Carter all that time, and knew fear was truth, not excuse. Naomi Nami Carter told Helen Carter she did not blame her, but she needed her to choose what was right over what was easy. After a long pause, Helen Carter promised she would try, and for once trying sounded like the beginning of action. The next morning, Lucas Carter sent only 2 words to Naomi Nami Carter. I understand. She read the message and left it unanswered because understanding was a beginning, not accountability, and certainly not repair. Edward Carter sent nothing at all in the days and weeks that followed, and his silence was an old language finally heard clearly. 6 months later, spring returned to Portland, and green life began pushing through the same soil neglect had almost buried. Through winter, Naomi Nami Carter had worked the garden on hands and knees, cutting dead weight and loosening sour ground. The roots had survived abandonment, just as she had. They only needed air, light, and someone willing to tend them. With her student loans paid in full, every dollar of debt gone, Naomi Nami Carter felt one old chain finally break. She used part of the trust to lease a studio in the Alberta Arts District and put Brennan Landscape Design on the door. The name Brennan meant something different now, less inheritance of control and more inheritance of building, patience, and vision. The Hawthorne house became both home and office, and the downstairs study no longer belonged to Edward Carter's mythology. Naomi Nami Carter replaced legal volumes with plant guides, soil samples, and seed catalogs, rewriting the room through work. On weekends, Ethan came by to help in the garden, and Aunt Beatrice called every Sunday morning without fail. In April, Helen Carter visited the house for the first time without Edward Carter beside her, and that mattered. Mother and daughter said very little. They planted tulip bulbs by the front walk, and the quiet between them finally healed something. Across town, Edward Carter rented an apartment and told others whatever story preserved his own innocence in his mind. Depending on the audience, he said the house had been stolen, Evelyn Carter manipulated, or Samuel Whitmore to blame. Yet every version ended the same way, with Edward Carter insisting he was the victim and never the architect of ruin. Lucas Carter's suspension from the bar lasted 6 months, and his marriage to Claire Carter quietly came apart soon after. He did not contact Naomi Nami Carter again, and she kept the door open without standing in it waiting. I am telling you this now from the porch of the Cannon Beach cottage on a Saturday with the tide rolled back. Haystack Rock stands unbothered, while rosemary, thyme, and lavender grow by the steps, stronger because the wind keeps testing them. I'm not telling this story to teach neat lessons, because every family is its own country with private wars and hidden laws. I can only tell you what Naomi Nami Carter learned after 29 years of silence, being mistaken for agreement. Silence is not consent. Sometimes it is only a person waiting for proof strong enough to survive the room they were born into. Waiting is not weakness either. There is a difference between someone who cannot fight and someone choosing the right moment. And the true inheritance Evelyn Carter left was not only money, property, or legal advantage, but proof that Naomi Nami Carter mattered. Evelyn Carter saw the real builder in her granddaughter and protected that person not with praise alone, but with plans. On the studio wall, the old Frank Lloyd Wright poster still hangs with its curling edges, and it means something new now. The girl who taped it up at 16 was enough then, enough later, and enough long before anyone in that house admitted it. One spring morning, Naomi Nami Carter knelt in the Hawthorne garden, planting the same Sarah Bernhardt peonies Evelyn Carter loved. She set the roots the way Evelyn Carter had taught her, whole root ball, nothing left behind, every fragile thing given room. As sunlight cleared the roofline, an envelope appeared on the porch with no stamp, no return address, only her name. The handwriting belonged not to Evelyn Carter this time, but to another woman who had taken too long to speak. Inside, Helen Carter had written one line. "I'm sorry I never stood up. I'm standing now." Naomi Nami Carter tucked that note beside Evelyn Carter's old letter and carried both inside the house built for care. For the first time in 29 years, crossing that threshold did not feel like reporting for judgment. It felt like coming home. Thank you for staying with this story to the end, because some endings matter only when every witness remains present. If this story gave you anger, relief, recognition, or hope, then it reached exactly where it needed to land. If you know what it means to be diminished by family, remember this. Document the truth before anyone rewrites your life for you. Protect your peace, trust the evidence, and never confuse endurance with permission for others to keep harming you. Let the people who love you prove it in action, in planning, in respect, and not only in words spoken too late. And if you are waiting for the right moment to defend yourself, know that choosing your time can also be a form of strength. This is my advice to everyone. When love and control wear the same face, believe the pattern, gather proof, and choose yourself.